The ballroom was too perfect. Polished marble floors, gold accents on every surface, and a string quartet playing something elegant but soulless near the bar. Everything about the room said curated, controlled, expected. I paused at the entrance, not sure if I should turn back or smile through it. But then I heard my name. Check in. A long table with a woman behind it friendly enough flipping through name tags in alphabetical order. Alicia, I said. She smiled and handed it to me without a second glance, and just like that, the breath caught in my throat. Alicia, the Letdown. It was printed in soft script beneath my name. Not a sticker, not scribbled in after the fact. Designed, intentional. For a second, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone was trying to be funny. Maybe it was for someone else. Maybe I was overreacting. But I knew better. I looked up and across the room near the champagne fountain. She was already watching me. Judith, my father's wife, my stepmother. The perfect hostess in a navy blue gown, sipping wine, smiling like she had just won something small and cruel. Her gaze didn't shift when our eyes met. She raised her glass slightly as if in salute. My fingers tightened around the name tag. The room kept moving around me, voices layered with laughter, small talk, and silverware against porcelain. But in that moment, it was just me and her. I wanted to leave. I wanted to tear the tag in half, throw it on the floor, and walk out without a word. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years behind this moment. Maybe it was the way no one else noticed or cared. Maybe I was tired of pretending. So I took a breath, smoothed the tag flat between my palms, and I decided. If they wanted to call me the Letdown, I'd show them exactly what that meant. Not with a tantrum, not with drama, but with silence, timing, and a truth that would cut deeper than anything printed on paper. My name is Alicia Morgan. I'm 35 years old. I live alone in a small apartment in Oak Park, and I work as a reference librarian at a public library that smells like old pages and cheap coffee. My life isn't glamorous. I don't have awards on the wall or letters after my name. But it's mine. I read. I teach weekend writing classes to kids. I run a book club for senior women who insist on smuggling in wine. My life is small and quiet, and for the most part, it's good. But in my father's world, it's a disappointment. My father is Dr. Gerald Morgan, retired professor of history, Ivy League, educated former department chair, the kind of man who gives keynote speeches and gets invited to formal dinners just to have his opinion heard. He's respected, admired, quoted, and he prefers things that reflect well on him. I didn't realize that until I was almost out of high school. Until I saw how often he introduced me not as Alicia, his daughter, but as the one who's still figuring things out. That became the phrase. Still figuring things out. I wasn't in trouble, I wasn't reckless, I wasn't wild, I just wasn't impressive. And in his world, that was worse. It didn't help that he remarried when I was 15. Judith arrived like a new anchor dropped into a quiet lake. She was polished, organized, brilliant in social settings. Her job in public relations meant she always knew what to say, how to spin things, how to reshape a moment. I used to think she tried to connect with me. She'd ask questions in front of people, compliment my clothes, invite me into group photos. But in private, there was distance, calculation, correction. She didn't like how quiet I was. She didn't like my sarcasm. She didn't like how I never seemed to fit into her perfect image of family. She had a son from a previous marriage, Nathan. He was a year younger than me, but treated like a second coming of Gerald. Straight-A student, pre-law sharp suits, polished speeches. He made sure everyone knew what he had achieved, and Judith made sure my father saw it. Over the years, family gatherings turned into performances. Nathan talking about law school, Judith talking about Nathan, my father nodding in approval, and me fading further into the background. It wasn't hate. It was erasure. I became the placeholder at the edge of the group photo, the name added last to the Christmas card list, the person they occasionally mentioned with a sigh. They never said it outright. They didn't need to. It was in the pauses, the silence, the way their eyes moved past me when I tried to speak. I used to think if I just worked hard enough they'd notice, that if I succeeded in my own quiet way, it would earn me a seat at the table. But I was never loud enough to be seen. Not in their world. I came to the retirement party because my aunt, my father's sister, asked me to. She was always kind to me, always tried to bridge the gap. "It's a big night," she said. "You should be there." And I said yes, even though I knew better. Even though I'd already decided long ago that some rooms are not made for you. But I came anyway. And now here I was, holding a name tag with a title I never asked for, but somehow always carried. The thing about resentment is that it rarely arrives as a thunderclap. It seeps in like fog, slow and hard to notice until you're surrounded. That's how it was with me and my father. There was no one moment when I stopped being his daughter and started being a reminder of something he'd rather forget. It just happened inch by inch. After Judith moved in, things changed. At first, it was subtle. Family dinners where Nathan's opinions were asked first. Holiday cards where my name was misspelled or left off entirely. Birthday calls that came 2 days late with a distracted apology. My father didn't forget me. He minimized me. That was worse. Nathan started calling him Dad almost immediately. And my dad, loved it. It was easier that way, cleaner. A boy with sharp edges and big ambition, a reflection of who he used to be. I, on the other hand, was complicated. I read poetry. I cried when I saw birds stuck in fences. I didn't want to go to law school. I wanted to work with books, help people. I remember once during my first year working at the library, Judith asked if I was still shelving paperbacks. It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal. But the worst part wasn't her. It was my father standing right next to her, chuckling like she'd just told a cute little joke. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you want to keep the peace in a family that decided long ago where you rank. I stopped going to family events regularly after I turned 25. I was tired. Tired of showing up and being ignored. Tired of trying to impress people who had already made up their minds about me. But every few years my aunt would ask and I'd say yes. I'd show up. I'd smile. I'd let them pretend for one night that they were a united family, and every time I'd leave feeling like I'd scraped a little more of myself away. The thing is, I wasn't angry, not at first. I was sad, disappointed, like someone watching a movie they used to love, and realizing they no longer recognized the characters. That's what it was like seeing my father with Judith. With Nathan. They were his family now, his team. I was the footnote. One Thanksgiving I brought homemade pies. I'd spent the whole night baking them. When I arrived, Judith smiled and said, "How sweet. We already have 4, but we'll squeeze yours in somewhere." Mine stayed on the counter untouched. Nathan made a joke later about artisan librarian desserts, and everyone laughed, including my father. I smiled too. I always smiled. That was my role. Quiet, harmless, easy to ignore. Judith and Nathan fit into my father's life like a puzzle he'd always been trying to solve. They were sharp where I was soft, loud where I was thoughtful, ambitious where I was content. And my father loved that, because he didn't really want a daughter. He wanted a legacy, and I refused to become a monument to someone else's version of success. I remember once when I was in college, I sent him a short story I had written. It had won a campus award, and I was proud. Weeks passed, no response. When I asked if he'd read it, he said, "Oh, I think Judith might have printed it. Somewhere." That was the end of that. Over the years, I built a life that didn't include them, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. I had friends, students, neighbors who valued what I offered. They saw me. They didn't measure me against expectations I never agreed to, but still, some part of me kept hoping. Not for a big change, just for a moment. A sign that maybe, just maybe, my father still saw me as his. And that hope was what pulled me into that ballroom. That's what made me say yes when I knew better. What made me brush my hair back, zip up a simple dress, and walk into a room that had already decided I didn't belong. And then I saw the name tag, the Letdown. I shouldn't have been surprised. It wasn't even cruel by their standards. It was passive-aggressive, polished, controlled, just like Judith. But it hurt, not because it was new, but because it was so familiar. A perfect little summary of how they had seen me for years. Neat, tidy, brutal. I stood there staring at it until a server passed by with a tray of champagne. I took a glass. My fingers were trembling slightly, so I took a sip. It didn't help. Across the room, I saw Nathan. He was surrounded by people telling some story with big hand gestures. He was good at that, always had been. He caught my eye for a second. No recognition, no acknowledgement. Just a glance, then back to the spotlight. It was like I had never existed, and maybe to him I never really had. My father was talking to two professors I recognized from his university days. Judith was working the room like she was the mayor. Everyone had a place, a role, except me. I looked down at the name tag one more time, and something in me went still, cold, clear. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to storm out. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. But it wouldn't be the kind they expected. I held the name tag in my hand for a while before putting it on, not because I accepted it, but because I wanted it to be visible. Let them see what they had written, what they thought of me. Let them see the words they used behind closed doors finally brought into the light. The small adhesive pressed against the fabric of my dress just over my heart. Judith would expect me to remove it, to be embarrassed, to disappear like I always had. But not tonight. A server passed with another round of drinks, and I took a second glass of champagne, letting the coolness soothe the rising heat in my chest. I walked slowly into the crowd, smiling just enough, nodding when people greeted me like they were surprised to see me. Maybe they were. One of Dad's colleagues did a double take when he read my tag, then quickly looked away. Another woman, someone I didn't recognize, actually laughed like it was clever. I didn't say anything. I let the words do their work, let the quiet discomfort ripple like a stain, slowly spreading across a white tablecloth. I passed Nathan near the bar. He didn't notice. He was too busy retelling some story from his firm's recent victory, surrounded by the kind of people who nod like they're being paid for it. Judith stood nearby, beaming like she'd raised him herself. She saw me, saw the tag. Her lips lifted slightly in a smile that wasn't kind. I tilted my head, gave her the same small nod I'd perfected over the years. Passive, polite, forgettable. That was what she wanted me to be. I could see my father now near the stage, laughing with two men in suits. The light from the chandeliers caught the silver in his hair. He looked good, relaxed, celebrated, like a man who had built something worthy and was finally reaping the applause. He hadn't seen me yet, or maybe he had and just didn't want to interrupt the flow of admiration. Either way, I waited. I didn't go to him. I waited until the spotlight shifted, until he turned and saw me. And when he did, his smile faltered. Not fully. Not in a way that most people would notice. But I did. I'd spent my whole life watching his expressions shift when I entered the room. The moment of calculation, of adjustment. Tonight was no different. "Alicia," he said as he stepped forward, his voice warm but hollow. "You made it." I nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." He gave a small laugh like it was a shared joke between us. It wasn't. He glanced at the name tag, eyes pausing there for a breath too long. "Interesting touch," he said. I met his gaze. I thought so too. He didn't ask who wrote it, didn't deny it, didn't apologize. Of course not. That wasn't his way. Judith floated over, then her voice too bright. "Look at this beautiful daughter of yours," she said, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "You must be proud." She knew exactly what she was doing. My father didn't respond. Judith looked at me, her smile perfectly pleasant. "I hope the name tag made you laugh." Nathan came up with a bunch of them. He has such a sense of humor. There it was. The deflection, the lie, the game. I smiled. Hilarious. She raised her glass. "Well, you know what they say, if you can't laugh at yourself, then someone else will do it for you." I finished for her. Her smile tightened. My father looked between us, the discomfort flickering behind his eyes like a television on mute. "It's all in fun," Judith said, still smiling, still holding court. "We wanted tonight to be lighthearted. Memorable." "Oh," I said, softly. "It will be." I walked away before they could respond. Not fast, not dramatic, just slow enough to make them watch me go. I moved through the room, letting the name tag catch the light, letting their eyes slide over it, and then away. No one said anything to my face. That was the rule here. Keep it polite. Keep it clean. Pretend the poison in the wine isn't there if you just keep sipping slowly enough. I could feel it building, the tension, the quiet buzz of something rising under my skin. I wasn't angry. I was sharp, ready. When a server passed by with another tray, I took a glass, not to drink, but to hold. A prop, a signal. The way Judith used her wine glass as punctuation, I would use mine to cut through the noise. I stepped toward the center of the room where the lights were soft and the music had dipped into something atmospheric. I tapped the glass lightly with my ring, a soft clink. It was enough. The sound floated out like a ripple, catching the attention of a few people, then more. Heads turned. Voices quieted. My father straightened near the stage. Judith lowered her glass. Nathan looked up from whatever performance he was in the middle of. The moment stretched. And then I smiled. I raised my glass slightly and said I'd like to make a toast. The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. They carried because no one expected me to speak. Not here. Not ever. A few awkward claps, some polite laughter. Judith's smile froze just slightly. My father took a half step forward, uncertain. To legacy, I began, and the room went still. To legacy, I said again, slower this time. The word felt heavy in my mouth, like it had been waiting years to be spoken aloud. I let my eyes scan the room. Every head was turned toward me now. People were holding their glasses half raised, some mid-sip, some already frozen. Judith's smile was still there, but the corners of her mouth twitched too tight. My father didn't blink. He was standing still, unreadable. That was his specialty. Tonight, I continued, we're here to honor a man who built something lasting, a career, a name, a family, a legacy. My voice didn't shake. I felt strangely calm, as if my nerves had been burned away earlier at the name tag table. Dr. Gerald Morgan has spent decades in lecture halls guiding minds, shaping thought. And at home, I paused for the briefest second, letting the silence fill in the meaning. He shaped something too. Or tried to. There were small reactions now, the tiniest shifts, a cough, a glance exchanged between two guests. Judith set her wine glass down on the side table, the motion too practiced to be natural. Legacy is an interesting thing, I said. It's not just what you build in public, it's what lingers in private. It's the stories people tell about you when they're not in your presence. It's what your children carry whether they want to or not. My eyes landed on my father. Some of us carry it with pride, others carry it like a weight, a reminder of what we're not. He didn't move. His hands were still clasped in front of him, the glass untouched. For some people, legacy is a polished plaque on a wall. For others, it's a name tag on a borrowed dress, one that says very simply what you've always felt but never said out loud. A low murmur now. People were catching on. I saw a woman near the back nudge her husband. Nathan shifted his weight and crossed his arms. Judith had stopped pretending to smile. And the thing is, I said most of us don't talk about what we weren't given. We're told not to make it uncomfortable, not to bring up old wounds. We're told to come to dinners, to wear the smile, to sit at the table, even if that table was never set for us. I took a breath and lowered my glass slightly. But I didn't come here to pretend. My father's jaw tensed. That was all. He didn't interrupt. Of course he didn't. He knew better. When I was 16, I wrote a short story, I said. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I printed a copy, left it on your desk. You never mentioned it. Weeks later, Judith said you used it to test a new printer. I guess it jammed. A small laugh rippled somewhere. I didn't smile, and when I brought home my first paycheck from the library, you asked if I had plans to do something more ambitious. When I mentioned teaching creative writing on weekends, you said it sounded like a hobby. My voice remained even. I wasn't here to accuse. I was here to reveal. Over the years, you told me I was bright, but I lacked follow-through. You said I was kind but unremarkable. You said I was free to choose my path so long as it eventually aligned with yours. I looked at Judith now. And you, her shoulders rose slightly. You once told me that I dulled the family shine, that Nathan's success helped balance my existence. A few people shifted, clearly uncomfortable now. A fork clinked against a plate. I let the silence build again. So imagine how fitting it felt to arrive tonight and see it written down for everyone to read. A name tag that said exactly what you've been thinking for years. I gently touched the sticker on my chest. The Letdown. Judith opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. I could take it off. I could tear it up. I could laugh it off like you probably hoped I would. But I won't. I looked at my father. Because it's true. Not the name, but the fact that you see me that way. You always have. I've spent 35 years trying to prove I deserved a seat at your table. That I wasn't the shadow of your legacy, but something else. Something of my own. I took another breath, steadying myself for the ending. But tonight, something occurred to me. I don't want a seat at that table. I don't want to be part of a family that only knows how to applaud when it sees its reflection in someone else. I'm not a mirror. I'm not a placeholder. And I am not yours to define. I lifted my glass again. So tonight I offer a toast. Not to the legacy you built, but to the one I found without you. I looked around the room, eyes meeting eyes, then turned back to my father. To the freedom of being invisible long enough to see everything clearly. To the strength that comes from silence. And to the last event I will ever attend under this name. I stepped forward, removed the name tag slowly, and pressed it onto the base of the champagne glass. Then I set the glass down gently on the table beside me. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said. And your legacy. Then I turned and walked away. No drama. No tears. Just the sound of my heels against the marble and the hush that followed behind me like a second shadow. I didn't look back. Not even when someone gasped. Not even when I heard Judith whisper something sharp and urgent. Not even when I passed Nathan and saw for the first time something like shame flicker in his eyes. I walked out of that ballroom the way I had always wanted to be seen, deliberate, unbothered, and completely, unmistakably my own. The night air outside hit me like a quiet wave. It was cool still and smelled faintly of lavender from the landscaping at the edge of the hotel's valet entrance. I didn't rush. I walked slowly down the stone path toward the parking lot, letting each step settle the adrenaline still simmering beneath my skin. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry either. I just felt done. I reached my car, sat down behind the wheel, and closed the door. Silence. Real silence. The kind that hums in your ears after you've been holding something in for too long. I didn't turn the engine on right away. Just sat there staring out at the glow of the city skyline beyond the hedges. In that moment, I realized I wasn't thinking about what they were doing inside. I wasn't imagining Judith's reaction, or my father's face, or the murmurs as people returned to their drinks and whispered about the girl who gave the weird toast. I wasn't wondering what Nathan would say, or who would defend whom. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I didn't care. The only thing I thought about was how light I felt. Not happy, not euphoric, but lighter. Like I had finally set down a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I turned my phone off before it could ring, before the texts could come in. I drove home with the windows half down, letting the breeze tug at my hair. The city moved past me in flashes. Streetlights blinking signs, strangers crossing intersections with stories I'd never know. And I liked it that way. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the floor of my living room with the lights off. The silence there was different than in the car. It was warmer, familiar, mine. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, and sat on the rug barefoot, knees tucked to my chest. I don't know how long I sat like that. Time didn't seem to matter. Eventually, I picked up my journal from the coffee table. It had been months since I'd written in it. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't know how to start. Tonight it came easy. The pen moved without hesitation. The first sentence I wrote was simple. Some names are given to you. Others you leave behind. The rest came slowly. Fragments, half-thoughts, but they were mine. My phone buzzed around midnight. I didn't look. I already knew who it was. The next morning I woke up to 16 missed calls. 3 from my father. 1 from Judith, 12 from unknown numbers. The family group chat was lit up full of reactions, demands, judgments. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what it would say, that I had made a scene, that I was dramatic, that I'd embarrassed my father on his night, that I always had to make it about me. I left it all unread. The only message I opened was from my aunt. It said I saw the name tag before you did. I'm sorry I didn't take it away. What you said needed to be said. I hope you're okay. Call me when you're ready. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the screen, then turned it off again. In the days that followed, I didn't hear from my father. Not directly. Judith posted a curated photo gallery from the party on her socials, captioned, "An unforgettable night of family legacy and love." I wasn't in a single photo, not even the wide shots. It was like I'd never been there at all. Maybe that was the point. Maybe they would pretend it never happened, that I never stood in the middle of that ballroom and said what I said. Or maybe they couldn't pretend. Maybe I ruined their illusion. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't waiting for them to call. I wasn't waiting for an apology or an invitation to explain myself. I didn't want closure from them. I had already given it to myself. I went back to work at the library. I met with my students. I kept showing up to my life like nothing had happened because nothing had happened to them. But everything had changed for me. Every time I walked into my apartment and saw the little stack of books by the door or the plant I forgot to water but somehow hadn't died, I felt peace. I felt space. I felt like I could finally exhale. I wasn't a disappointment. I wasn't a letdown. I was simply someone they never tried to understand, someone who no longer needed to be understood by them. And that, strangely, was enough. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept quiet, if I'd smiled through the night, worn the name tag like a joke, and left quietly like I'd done so many times before. Would anything have changed? Probably not. They would have poured another round of champagne, clinked glasses, posted their carefully filtered photos, and gone on believing the story they had always told themselves, that I was distant, that I was difficult, that I didn't try. But I did try. I spent years showing up in ways they never saw. I tried to meet them in the middle, to be acceptable, to shrink myself small enough to fit into their version of a daughter. I thought if I could just be quiet enough, patient enough, they'd eventually hear me. They never did. And so I stopped trying to speak their language. That night, I spoke my own. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. A final note at the end of a long, dissonant song. There are people in this world who will only ever love you if you reflect them back to themselves. People who can only show affection when it makes them look good. And if you don't play the part, if you don't complete their story, you become the flaw, the weakness, the letdown. But here's what I've learned. Being called a disappointment says more about the person doing the naming than the one being named. It reveals the limits of their love, the conditions of their pride, the smallness of their vision. My father spent his life teaching about legacy, about what gets remembered, but he never asked himself what he would be remembered for. Not the awards, not the published works, not the speeches, but the people, the silences. The daughter who stood quietly at the edge of every room waiting. I'm not waiting anymore. There won't be another invitation, another dinner, another toast made in someone else's voice. I've stepped out of their orbit, and I don't miss the gravity. Some nights I think about writing him a letter, not to explain, just to tell the truth one last time. But then I remind myself I already did. In a room full of people who weren't really listening, I said everything I needed to say, and for once, I didn't soften the edges. I didn't make myself small. That was the real toast, the real legacy, not the one they celebrated, but the one I created the moment I walked away. There is something powerful about ending a story on your own terms, not slamming the door, but closing it gently, locking it, walking down the hall towards something quieter, something kinder. Something that sounds like your own voice finally echoing back. So, if you're reading this or hearing it, and you've ever been called the letdown, the disappointment, the one who didn't quite fit, let me tell you something. You're not broken. You're not lesser. You're just not what they wanted. And that's okay. You don't have to be. You only have to be what you are. And that, in all its quiet, unpolished beauty, is enough. It always was.